Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. While we might be all enjoying the sunshine, the salmon anglers are certainly crying out for some rain, and especially as the start of the salmon run begins to increase in earnest. So this week we're joined by the Blackwater's Conor Arnold to tell us about the unique May salmon that arrived this month in the Blackwater and whether the spring run's decline could actually herald an increase in the back end. So stay tuned for that. Some really interesting thoughts from Conor on it. But first, Tom, are the jungle drums beating?
Jungle drums are beating and Mayfly is up. It's one of the earliest hatches I witnessed up in this neck of the woods in my part of the Corrib, as fishing Mayfly patterns to fish trout taking Mayfly on Easter weekend, the 20th, 21st. Yeah.
Wow.
It's phenomenal. I've never seen it that early. I've seen hatches in and around that time, but I've never seen sustained hatches, the fly been up and fish taking them constantly. So yeah, had some really good fishing. It's still up. I mean, this week I witnessed some phenomenal hatches. I often say it about Corrib, like it's not like the Midland Lost or like Sheelan, which is renowned. But like to be honest with you, I've said it before. Sheelan, you could pick flies in a boat. You didn't have to buy them off, Paul Malloy. I said that before. Sorry, Paul. You're sure that Paul's not selling them now anyway. But yeah, you could pick flies.
You made enough money from it.
He could change a €500 note, for God's sake. But you could pick them from a boat this week. And a beautiful sight last night was coming in. And we don't get it too often here in Corrib, was waves upon waves of spent gnat going out. It was beautiful in the sunlight. And to be honest with you, it's almost like, the field of lambs or something, but like to see the spent gnat, that the females flying out again. And a beautiful evening. I have to say, I was kind of almost moved by it because it's something fantastic. It's nature taking its course. It was really nice on a calm still. Well, it wasn't that calm because it was a nice little wave, a nice little wind just blowing them out. It was absolutely beautiful. But yeah, back to the fishing. Fishing was good when we got conditions. But this week, t-shirts and ice cream in May, it's not right. There's just something not right with that. But yeah, so this week weather's gone really tough.
Was it hard fishing? So at the start of the Mayfly, was it better fishing, and has it gotten harder because of the just incessant sun?
Incessant sun, it's gotten harder. Fishing was really nice and some good fish. And depending on where you go, I'd go to a place where I know there's better than average fish, and they were moving. They wouldn't be moving as often as the other places. And you go to other places where there's smaller fish, but you get a lot of action because those fish are on the move more constantly. Yeah, some cracking fishing. Naturally, of course, it started off on wets. So we've discussed this before. The maize, at the start of the hatch, I always find wets will probably outfish everything. And that was the case here. And now it's switched to dries. Funny enough, we're catching quite a few fish this week on Mayfly nymphs. And, Mayfly nymphs have become very big, probably on the Midland Lakes, but they're doing a lot. I will say one of the reasons they're successful there is because a huge hatch of mayflies, where it's easier for the fish to go along and mop them up at depths. Probably one of the reasons it's working here this week is the big hatches of mayfly, and fish are cottoned onto them, and you can target them. We've had some lovely fish on them. So yeah, look, it hasn't been all. It's just fishing isn't hopeless, but it's just getting harder and harder. I mean, initially when the weather broke and we got the fine weather, to be honest, your dries were doing as well, even in the bright sun. Some cracking fish there last weekend on dry maize. Now finding they're not moving as much to the surface in the bright sunlight. And that's probably where the mayfly nymphs are coming in.
And are you coming to the tail end of it as well?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Unless this, yeah, I went to a place today. I've been concentrating on areas that I know the mayfly has been in for the last week and a half, and we're picking up fish just by sticking at them. But this afternoon, I just took a break just for a change. I went to a place, and I think mayfly's up right there. Yes, it was about a 15-minute journey, and I'm hoping. I'd always be working that from May. In a lake as big as Corrib, and a lot of the bigger lakes, there's areas where the mayfly will hatch first. Areas that they come up shortly afterwards, and then there's other areas where it's very late. So I'd have them in mind for as the month goes on. It's funny, last year what happened was it was up early. It was up the last week in April last year, and we were very lucky. It lasted for 6 weeks. but we never got huge hatches.
Yeah,
It just petered
yeah,
on,
it was just kind of dribs and drabs, kind of, was it? Yeah, trickling.
trickling
Yeah.
on. Now, that's what my fear is this with the huge hatches, that it could be all spent out. But, you know, if that happens, it happens. You know, that's the way it goes. You know, so, as we were having lunch in the sunshine today, and us, you know, us gillies or guides or boatmen in council, I was going, my God, will it be over early? Oh my God. You know, if it is, that's 20, and that's what's been bestowed. You know, you got to take it. You got to
Yeah.
be a bit stoical about it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, take what the conditions give you, what Mother Nature throws at you, and work with the conditions, isn't it? As they say.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, listen, we're going to keep in touch with the Mayfly over the next few weeks. We're planning to do definitely an episode at the end to kind of review it all, you know, after Sheelan's kind of wrapped up. So we'll find out how things went there. We're hoping to get an update from Derg, and obviously we'll get a proper, more in-depth review on Corrib as well. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. And for anybody that's been out or getting out for the Mayfly, tight lines for it. And I look forward to hearing how he's got on as well. But look, let's get back to this week's guest. And our focus is on salmon this week with Conor Arnold from the Blackwater.
When we got rain the last week of September, typically, there was a glut of coloured fish moved on the Blackwater. There was a couple of weeks where there was an awful lot of fish moved, right? Then we got kind of a sustained high water period. It went quiet for a week or two, and then there was a run of fresh fish. Now, I heard about this in other rivers, and I touched base with a few other guys around the place, and there was a similar run in other rivers late last year. I'm talking about the start of November. So that went on for 2, maybe 3 weeks. And these were proper autumn fish. I haven't seen them in close to 10 years. So fresh purple-back double figure fish and quite a good volume of them. So then I was kind of wondering, have things changed for one reason or another? Are they going that much later again? So I was curious. They also spawned very early last year. They spawned about the second week of December, which is usually with us as Christmas week is peak time. There was no kelts in the river in February. Very, very few anyway, compared to normal. And now we've had this really slack opening, despite the good conditions. And it's only the last few days that a few fish are starting to be seen and show up. I'd like to see a few of these fish properly and see, are they actually springers or are they mayfish? Because our mayfish are built differently to springers. If they are springers, it would look like the whole thing is shifted a couple of months.
So, Conor, do you put that down to, like, in the sense of everything was delayed last year because of the lack of rain? So everything was basically pushed back a couple of months.
The fish that were waiting in the estuary and in the lower part of the river, they were there, they were waiting for water. The fish that came after that weren't waiting. It was their time to come. They were fresh when they came in. So what went beforehand had no bearing on that run of fish. They were a very traditional run of fish that we had here and had in an awful lot of rivers in Ireland once upon a time. But I haven't seen it for close on 10 years.
Yeah, because the back end run, you know, we always thought had kind of all but gone. Like
it was. So this very late run of fish last year was very unusual. It was back to what it used to. Well, I won't say it was back to what it used to be, but it was a very good sign because before that run used to start around the middle of September, start of September, depending on conditions, and go out to the start of November. Right now, this was only 2 weeks of a run, but it was a definite run of fresh fish in November.
Yeah, but that's very interesting that you say, Conor. But like that would have, but it coincided last year with early spawning, whereas like 10 years ago, to be honest with you, I doubt like there would have been, you know, when you last experienced a proper autumn run, they would have spawned at the later time, I presume, the more normal time. Like it looks like those fish didn't spend a lot of time in the river.
They didn't. Those fish never do anyway, and they don't go to the top of the river either. Those late run fish only come to the middle of the river mostly. An awful lot of them will actually stop in the lower river and go up the streams and the tributaries in the lower river. Or if you have low water conditions, they will spawn in the main river itself. That's nature's way of kind of looking after itself. They come in late, don't spend much time, pair up, do their spawning, and they're back out again. The spring fish that go all the way to the top of the river are the kelts that we're catching in February.
But we're not seeing much of those at the moment, or you weren't seeing much of those earlier this season, you're saying?
No, this year was probably, I'd say, the lowest kelt count in February that I've seen in quite a number of years that just weren't in the river.
Is that so? Like, I suppose there's still so many kind of ifs, buts, and maybes around it. Like, there's a couple of different hypotheses on that. Then, Connor, is it that is the run potentially reverting back to a main back end run, replacing the spring run? Is it?
That's one school of thought. No, again, this is just anecdotal. There is no science behind this. This is what I've seen on the river. Okay, so I don't have any science to back this up. But in the past, this cycle has gone before that. You've had a number of years of good spring runs, and then it kind of peters out. The back end run takes over, and it reverts like that. It goes like that. And it has done before. Whether it's happening again, I'm not sure. Only time will tell. But a very good indicator was the sense that this year, all over the country, we were all in the same boat with a distinct lack of fish early on. Even some rivers, including some up the west that have hatcheries in their own catchments, they were very, very slow as well. So those fish weren't coming back anywhere. It wasn't as if it was just one or two rivers. It was the same all over. It would be interesting to see how the rest of the season pans out, and if we do get another late run.
If you really want to look at a glass half empty, you could say it's actually just the spring run is just being decimated and disappearing the way the back end run has been.
Yep, good. It's another way of looking at it. But as I mentioned to you before, it would be interesting to see what these fish look like. Now, again, if we did have someone doing scientific surveys, scale samples would tell us a lot off of these fish, but you'd nearly know by looking at them, because we get different runs here in the Blackwater. We get our spring run, okay? Then they peter out usually at the end of April. We get May fish before the grills. It's a separate run. They look different.
Yeah, could you actually, because I'm always fascinated by that, Connor, could you just maybe spend a bit of time just explaining that to people, the May run? And is that specific to the Blackwater?
No, it's not specific to the Blackwater, but it is probably one of the most prominent rivers with that run of fish. So they're much deeper, much stronger fish, and have a bigger average size than our spring fish. Our spring fish are quite small by spring standards, kind of 6 to 9, 10 pounds. That's the average. The May fish would step it up a bit. They would be anything from kind of 8 to 14 on the average, with some of the ones going up to 20 pounds. Obviously they're few and far between now, but they look far chunkier fish. They're much deeper and broader on the back. So they look
you'd know one from the look of it, Connor.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Why is it? I was always fascinated. Why is it that this May run is different? Do you get similar in Scotland as well?
You do in some systems in Scotland. The guys in Scotland will tell you more about it than me. Our spring run fish are mostly female, and they're 2 sea winter fish. The May run fish would also be 2 sea winters mostly, and mostly hens, but they seem to have spent much more time feeding, or else in a different feeding ground to give them the different shape. So they're similar in makeup as regards the time they've spent at sea and their age, but they're probably going to different feeding grounds, feeding on different, probably more fatty foods, and that's why they have the better shape coming back.
Can I actually ask what I would probably deem quite a stupid question, Connor? Sorry. Well, you said they're both the spring run and the May run are both predominantly hen fish.
Correct.
Okay, so how does that work out? Like, I mean, seriously, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about when they go spawning. Sorry.
Yes, because you have the grills run is predominantly male.
Right. So you're having a crossover then that the predominant you'll have grills spawning with a hen springfish.
Yeah, you can do. So it does vary. So some rivers would be 50-50, but some rivers can be as much as 80-20 bias both ways. You can get the let's say the spring fish, 80% hens, and vice versa with the grills run. So it does vary, but generally speaking, the multi-sea winter fish that come back earlier in the season are mostly hens. That's why you would often hear people saying, "Oh, big hens are they're sacred. You should look after them. They've got all the eggs." But big cockfish are just as important, because when it comes to spawning time, men being men, they'll cover as many reds as possible. However, the hen will only sit on one.
Right.
So if you have a large cockfish in one area, he will cover several large hens. And if they breed, you get very good sized eggs, which have a higher survival rate.
Basically, for the multi-sea winter fish, it's better if it's a large cockfish that it's a multi-sea winter cockfish that's spawning with them, where
Yeah, it will
not
give
as good, better than the grills.
Yes.
When's the main run of that large cockfish coming in?
You would get them in the summer. You still get a few throughout the spring and May period. You get them in the summer, and you always get a good run of them in the autumn as well. You get a good mix in the autumn. It used to be 50-50 roughly. But again, when it comes to spawning, one cockfish will cover several reds. He'll keep going. That's why you don't see too many kelts as cockfish, because they're absolutely exhausted by the end of it.
And are they more likely to die off? Like,
Yeah. I'd say again, this is just a rough estimate, but it's probably something as high as 95% of the cockfish would die after spawning.
Yeah. Multiple spawners are predominantly henfish, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that why then, like, you'd often hear, stories fellas would see on the riverbank, say maybe in the off season, they'd see the carcass of a large fish there. I've
Yep.
heard stories on the shore here, and it's probably, like you said, it's more than likely a cockfish that's run his course, so to speak.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If that cockfish, if it was his second time back, the chances of him come back a third time are slim to none. And especially if he's after covering several reds and he's absolutely exhausted, his number's up.
Does that mean then, because obviously we know, because of the decimation of the numbers, that if there is less and less of the large cockfish to go around, is that part of the reason you think why we're seeing smaller size salmon? Or is one theory also another theory, isn't it, that they're having to travel further to the feeding grounds?
Yeah, we don't exactly know what the story is with our feeding grounds. We don't have enough research. We don't have enough proactive work going on to establish patterns and migratory routes. And do they change from one year to the next, or are they consistent? We don't know. We don't know enough about it.
Are we doing any research on that, Conor?
Very little that I can find. I would love for someone to come on and tell me there's a program running that I don't know about. That's why I was kind of thinking there lately that if there was any PhD students looking for a project to undertake, it would be a very interesting project. The material would be credible, and it would be able to submit it to the relevant government departments. I don't think funding would be an issue for it. There's a lot of other projects internationally that we could follow from Scotland and Norway and stuff like that, where they do pretty comprehensive small track tagging programs. And it's not just 1 year either. You need to establish a pattern on this.
Over a number of years, an ongoing survey. We're not doing any small tracking. Are we doing any small tracking?
There's nothing happening in the Blackwater. If there's something happening outside of the Blackwater, I don't know about it. But I've searched and I can't find anything.
Well, please, if anybody knows or anybody from the relevant body is aware of a small tracking program, please do get in touch with us and we will update accordingly. It'd be great to find out more about it. But what you're saying, Conor, is for any potential PhD students who are listening to this, you're saying the funding would be there. Is this from commercial bodies that would fund something like this, you think?
I'm a member of a couple of pretty big organizations there. I'm part of Loop Tackle. I have been for about 11 years. I'm also part of Patagonia for a number of years. They have several funding schemes for projects like this. I'm sure there will be other bodies that would be willing to invest and help because, at the end of the day, it's in their interests as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like, I suppose in Scotland, like, you had the likes of the Missing Salmon Alliance, all these kind of programs ongoing. It is part of the problem. Like, take the IFI, which is responsible for freshwater. So therefore, when you go out past freshwater, it's a kind of a case of, well, oh, sorry, that's not our remit. And the salmon is kind of falling between two stools here.
Possibly, but I would say that any of the fish that are coming back into the rivers, the IFI's remit is to look after our waterways. The salmon inhabit our waterways, and they're a very important indicator species. If I was one of the head men in IFI, I would be very curious to know what's happening to one of our most important fish in the rivers. Regardless what's happening out at sea, if you could start programs to find out where they're going and something, at least you would have some indication as to what's happening, and then you could formulate a plan if it was in your control. But the not knowing is the killer.
And this always does my head in, Connor, is like, and when I was doing the last salmon podcast as well, we can talk all about habitat restoration and conservation in freshwater and best practice and catch and release and all that. But if we don't know what the hell's going on out in the high seas, which we don't realistically, you're kind of, it's just a big fog out there. And without any data, how can we come up with any answers, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. You hit the nail on the head there. We really, really are miles behind a lot of other countries. And like, we have a small country, but we had a very profitable tourist business in this country. People's livelihoods depend on this. It's something that really demands a little bit of attention and investment to find out what's going on so that we could actually retain what we have rather than losing any more of it. It's vital to the country, as well as the salmon being part of our history and everything else that's in the rivers. Like I said, it's a very good indicator species.
I understand the tourist aspect of it. You definitely understand the tourist aspect of it. And we've said this before, it's not just that, and that's crucial. But there's another element of the salmon. It's a huge cultural involvement in Irish culture and our background and everything. And I just think sometimes it's been completely ignored.
Do you know? No, do you know why?
Absolutely.
Do you know why? Because it's too hard of a question for politicians to solve. If they can't solve bricks and mortar of building enough houses, right, which is very much an X plus Y equals Z equation. It's a quantitative matter. They're certainly not going to come up with a solution to solve a big problem such as what the hell's going on with the Atlantic salmon out in the ocean.
I would actually go a little bit further, Dara. I would suggest that their term in office is not long enough to justify the effort that needs to go into this. They're looking at it, and I challenge any politician to come down and start a project and do something constructive with it, because they're in office for 4 years and they look at their 4 years, what can they do, what's achievable for them, and what's going to get them elected the next time. And as far as they're concerned, salmon are not on their priority list.
I agree. And speaking of politicians, when we spoke to you before, Connor, like, you were having conversations with politicians trying to raise awareness.
Yep.
Obviously we had a change of government since then. So is it a case nearly that you have to go back to the starting blocks and start again? Like,
Yeah, that's like Groundhog Day.
yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. All over again.
All over again. So there's a couple of other things going on as well, aside from the politicians. But just with the politicians, it is back to square one. I don't think IFI are being told what to do by the politicians. If I start tugging at the coattails of IFI again, it goes nowhere. They sit down, they listen to me, they may or may not take it to the superiors. It dies there. At least if you target government and possibly even unelected members of parties, that you may have some bit of sway and some bit of impetus on a drive going forward.
See, and that's the thing I think as well, Connor, is that, they look like it. I think you're dead right. It's that political cycle. You're back to square one. New government, you're back to square one. So you're starting another how do you engage the public in that? You know what I mean? And we've spoken about this before as well. Like, oh yeah, something's happening to the salmon. Oh, it's out at the sea. It's not something. It's same with salmon farms. You know, we've gone on about the dangers of salmon farms. That's not something you can kind of see or appreciate, or and then even the kind of our link to nature, we're losing that. We're losing our culture and link to
Yeah,
salmon as well. It's just something that's kind of intangible, I suppose, is maybe the word. And when it's intangible, if the public doesn't really get it, the politicians aren't going to engage.
correct. That's why education is a massive, massive part of this. Schools projects, um, anything we can put together like that to actually make the kids aware of what it is that's there and what it is that could be lost. Get them involved, even with trout fishing and stuff like that. Just get them to the river, get them like my own kids were down with me in one of the beats there last night, and um, Lucas is 12 and Freya is 5, and all Freya wanted to do was go exploring. So Lucas had the unenviable job of tagging along with her and making sure that she was all right while I was cutting the grass. But that's a massive part of it. Let them sit there and turn over the stones, see the insects and the whole lot, and see a few trout rising or whatever. But take that into the classroom and deliver it on a much larger scale. IFI should be doing this. This shouldn't be up to the likes of me or anybody else. But it needs to be done.
I know we have to start somewhere and we need to do something, but like again, you're talking a generational kind of thing in terms of trying to raise awareness, but in the meantime, the here and now, how can we do it? Like, are you the only one, Connor? Or is there a couple of us like trying to fight this?
I'm not the only one. I do have help. I have help from a lot of people. A lot of people are busy and their lives are hectic, and you kind of have to delegate. And one person might do one job for you in connections, but I do have help. Um, just to go back a little bit to what you said there about the education being a generational thing. Okay, yeah, 100%, but it's the long-term view. You also mentioned about the here and now. So I'm going to touch on something now. Just go back 10 minutes into the conversation. We spoke about the salmon and the importance of the larger fish when it comes to spawning. We should not have commercial netting in any river in this country. The stocks of fish cannot sustain commercial netting. Commercial netting takes large fish first. Smaller fish can fit through the legal size of the nets. That's what you're left with. You mentioned that as well previously in the conversation, Dara, that small fish spawning give you, they're not as important as the big fish because they give you a lower survival rate. Our survival rate at the moment is probably somewhere between 2 to 3%. If we have grills and smaller fish that are predominantly spawning, that's going to fall even further. If the nets were not on any river in this country, those bigger fish that have made it back to the rivers would be able to go up the river, hopefully, and spawn. So I really think in the here and now, one of the most important things we could be doing is actually stop the netting from whatever way we decide to do it, or it's organized, but it needs to stop.
Do we know how many netsmen there are, or what volume of fish is taken by, or what's the allowable quota by them?
Varies, but I think it's something like 14% of the TAC in the Blackwater. So the TAC is the total allowable catch. They establish the total number of fish that can be harvested from a river. If I'd be better versed now to give you this, but from that, then there's a percentage that is allowed for the nets, and the nets get their quota. IFI monitor the nets and make sure that they get their quota the week before the season, that their season is up every year. And at the moment, we've just started to see a few fish creeping into the Blackwater. The weather looks dry and settled for the next 2 weeks, and then the nets go on the 11th of May, just in time for low water.
Wow.
Just in time. And you were saying, actually, we were chatting beforehand, Connor, like, for example, there's no netting in Scotland. There's no commercial netting in Scotland, no?
Not in the river estuaries, no. And all the rivers are mandatory catch and release until the 15th of June. At least they're trying to do their bit. And there are rivers in Scotland that are in trouble for one reason or another, but there are also rivers in Scotland that are still relatively healthy. and at least you're preserving what you have rather than running the risk of losing it completely.
And also, just speaking of kind of bodies doing their bit, look at Norway last year. They shut it down, like, for rightly or wrongly, and I know there was a huge outcry and it affected so many people, but they just were shutting it down. That's it. You know what I mean? There was no messing around. And I'd be interested. I think they're announcing soon, aren't they? Or they're in the middle of it, like the decision for this coming summer as well.
Yeah, they have most of it announced.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, a lot of the rivers around Western Norway and Trøndelag and stuff are open, with restrictions.
Yeah.
Right? They have reduced it. They had a bit of a eureka moment last year when it was like, oh my God, there's actually no fish. What are we going to do? You know? But the reason they had the eureka moment is because an awful lot of the fishing in Norway is owned by farmers. It's part of their income. So you had public vote stomping their foot going, right, lads, we need to sort this out. We don't have it here.
The IFI in their defense will say the TAC, we set the TAC, you know, we monitor what's harvestable and we'll close rivers down, you know, and majority of rivers probably are closed, aren't they? They're not, you know, that sense that aren't available for fishing. So they would say, look, it's something we do monitor and we will close them as needed.
Yeah. So the IFI base their a lot of their information on logbook returns and the netsman's returns. They do not do red counts. Okay, there hasn't been a fry count on the Blackwater, to the best of my knowledge, since 2019.
And it's also, I suppose, comes back to underfunding and those kind of catch-22 if you haven't got the resources to be putting in proper.
Yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, 100%. If they don't have the funding, they can't do the job.
How regular would fry counts have been in the past?
So again, it's back to the funding thing. They would kind of alternate. So they might do a particular river every other year, or if a river was in trouble, they might do it every year for 4 years and then leave it alone for a couple of years. And that's the kind of way they didn't do every river every year, or they didn't pick a river and do that every year and ignore another one. So they did try, in fairness, they did try to get around to all of them. They just didn't have the resources to do every river every year. So,
and if you had proper year-on-year numbers of fry count, that would add a hell of a lot more information to you for, let's say, your TACs or for whatever, or for your numbers of the fish in the river.
Yeah, 100%. I give you one example, Tom, right? So the River Dee in Scotland, they have a trust, the River Dee Trust. They do fry counts. They're funded by various means. They do fry counts every year, and they established the last couple of years the fry counts were badly down. Now, a lot of it was due to erosion from serious floods and the reds getting washed out. But they recognized it. So what they're doing is, because they've recognized that there's an issue for one reason or another, now they have smoke traps. So it's like a big tumble dryer. They put it into the tributary and they funnel the fish into it. They catch them in this. They transplant them into tanks. The tanks have the water from the river in them. They bring on the smolt in the tanks where they're protected and they can grow. And when they're ready to smoltify and undergo osmosis on the way out, they actually put them back downriver into the river so that they become imprinted and let them out to sea. So their survival rate now has increased because they realize there's a problem in the head of the river. So if they didn't do the fry count, they'd be much worse off.
But I just get the sense of, from this conversation that we've had, Conor, is there's a lot of frustration based on the fact, and it's not just yourself, it's the wider salmon community, fishery owners, you know, anybody involved in salmon angling in Ireland. So from that, more needs to be done in the waters, the rivers themselves, in terms of, like you said, fry count, in terms of commercial netting. But then we also need more being done in terms of smolt tracking, in terms of what's actually going out at the seas as well. So like from start to finish, we're not at the races at the moment, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Nowhere near it.
We started this conversation with so many questions, you know, about the autumn run. What does it mean? And I think that kind of sums it up nicely, Conor, where you're saying is we actually don't know, and here's the reasons why we don't know. Because if we can't measure it, we can't understand, and if we can't understand, well then We don't know what the future
Can't
holds
fix a
for it.
problem if you don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Come here, just finally then, Conor, on the fishing side of things, what are you hoping for this season?
Lots of salmon.
Could you elaborate on that, please?
But will the next few weeks be interesting in terms of the Mayfish that are caught? That'll give you a good sign, a good signal whether they're springers.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see over the next few weeks. Like I say, there's a few starting to sneak in now. So we'll see what they are once we see a few of them in the landing nets. And we'll see where it goes from there. We have, like I said, a dry couple of weeks. So the river's still okay. It's not terribly low. So the fish will still come through. Saw a couple there. Saturday I was teaching all day Saturday. Saw one Sunday evening. Actually came out of one there this evening.
Oh.
So yeah, there's a few tipping through. So let's hope that we can get some information from our side as to what's coming now, are they springers or mayfish, and when the grills start.
Fingers crossed and tight lines for a better season.
Hopefully, we've had 2 pretty long dry spells, so on the laws of averages, hopefully June, July, and August will be quite wet and keep us all happy.
Here, here. I'm with you on that one.
I'm sick of this bloody sun anyway,
Yeah.
Bring back the rain. I'm not used to this.
T-shirts and ice cream in May.
Conor, thanks a million. And listen, it's been great to chat to you. And look, I hope we'll catch up with you again and keep the powers that be on their toes.
Perfect stuff. Thanks a million, guys.
Our thanks to Conor for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus you can keep up to date on irelandonthefly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.